Hello and welcome. We're glad you're here. Today's webinar is designed to give you a clear and practical overview of divorce through a few key lenses that often get overlooked in the rush to just get it done. We're going to talk about the different ways to get divorce, including mediation, collaborative divorce, and litigation, and how those paths differ in cost, timeline, privacy, and conflict. How divorce can show up not just as a legal process, but it can impact your body, your stress levels, your decision-making, and your ability to advocate for yourself. The tax and financial details that can quietly create long-term consequences if they aren't addressed early, especially when you're dealing with things like a home, retirement accounts, a business, and support. And most importantly, why having the right team can help you make decisions that are not just final, but actually workable and durable for your next chapter. Our goal is for you to leave this conversation with more clarity, fewer surprises, and a stronger sense of what questions to ask, whether you're early in the process or in the middle of it. Now, a quick introduction to me, since I'll be your guide for certain parts of this conversation. My name is Michelle Muhammed. I'm a certified financial planner professional and a certified divorce financial analyst. I've been a financial professional for 25 years now, and I decided to specialize in the finances of divorce after seeing people who, well after they had overcome the emotional shocks of the divorce, were facing financial aftershocks with respect to their retirement and many other aspects of their financial life. And I wanted to get involved and help folks during the process so that they could make informed decisions as they looked at what this would mean or could mean for them in the next chapter of their lives. So, what is a CDFA? What is a certified divorce financial analyst? Well, we do a variety of things that help you figure out the full implications of the financial decisions made in the divorce. We can help you model settlement options. We can stress test your cash flow. We can walk you through retirement division implications and help you evaluate trade-offs so you're not making decisions in the dark. I work in two primary ways: as a financial advocate, supporting one spouse with analysis and strategy as they evaluate proposals and negotiate terms. Another option is working as a financial neutral, working with both spouses together, often in mediation or in collaborative divorce, some other type of alternative dispute resolution, to bring clarity to the numbers so decisions are informed and efficient. Here's a quick example of how that can matter. Imagine one spouse keeps the house, but the house is in both names. Well, one spouse is not, the other spouse is not living there. There are actually tax implications when they eventually sell the house. And without consulting with a certified divorce financial analyst or someone who understands that there are ways that you can preserve the tax exemption or tax capital gains tax exclusion for the other spouse who's not living in the home, you can find yourself having some nasty surprises later on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Blue, owner of Blue Heart Mediation, who will walk us through the different divorce pathways and how to think about which approach may fit your situation. Leslie?
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Leslie Blue. I'm a mediator and a CDFA. And I've been a mediator for the past 8 years, helping folks go through divorce in a kinder and gentler way, in a better way. And here today, I'm going to talk to you about the different ways that you are, the different ways you're able to get a divorce. So when most people think of divorce, they think of the typical, everybody's lawyering up. I need a lawyer. We're getting a divorce. And they think of litigation. And I'm happy to say that there are a couple of other ways to go through divorce, in addition to litigation. Litigation is that, again, the first way that people think, and it's a little bit more complex and conflict oriented. So sometimes the stakes are just not that high. Maybe people have been married for a short while. There are no children. Maybe there are not many assets. So you can do it yourself. This is when you just fill out the divorce paperwork yourself and file it at the courts, or do an online divorce where it's the same thing. You kind of go through the process, the paperwork online, and then file that with the courts. And a couple will do that on their own, typically to save money. And it's typically an option, again, if the stakes are very low. Now, the stakes might be high. You might be in a marriage where it's gone for a while and they are still seeking a divorce, but they've come to a mutual agreement that it's just time to go through divorce, and they aren't really looking to fight with each other or have high conflict. And in that case, that's when you might want to consider mediation. Mediation is that voluntary process where if both people agree to come to the table and talk about the settlement that they want and can come to an agreement on how they want to split their marital estate, then they can go through a successful mediation and at the end file their paperwork with the courts and get their divorce through that process. I think of kind of a half step away from mediation is arbitration. And that is a process similar to mediation, but at the end of that process, if the couple can't come to an agreement on how they want to settle the assets, then the arbitrator's decision will decide on that, final one or two issues that they couldn't decide upon. But it's still something that's available to a couple that's more amicable, and they think they kind of agree. Then again, back to litigation. This is just your typical, each side gets a lawyer, and you guys go to the attorneys guide you through the divorce process in court, and the judge makes their decision on how the marital estate will be settled. That's the process that a lot of people, again, think of when they think of divorce, and a lot of people turn to. And then finally, even if you still feel like you need the protection of a divorce and the couple is not necessarily that amicable and can't sit and decipher together, but they don't really want to fight, there's collaborative divorce. This is the process where each side does get their own attorney, but the team that's going to be working on your divorce case will consist of a communication specialist that will kind of guide the process between the two lawyers. There's usually a financial neutral, which is a person that is there to look at the finances and guide that part of the process and make sure things work out well. And then also a child specialist will be part of the divorce conversation there too. And that process, the team will work towards getting that couple to a settlement agreement outside of court. But again, at the end of the process, they file the paperwork and the couple is divorced. And it's just a little, it's a little bit more protective again, because each side has their own attorney, but it doesn't have to be as combative as just that raw litigation battle that goes through divorce. So I'm here for any questions that you have about the different processes and the ways to reach a divorce. And I'm glad to be on the panel today. Thanks, everyone.
Hi. Quick question for you. Have you ever had pain? By and large, the answer is yes, because pain is a normal, universal human experience. Now, we're here about the Unshakable Divorce. Would you consider divorce painful? Well, by and large, again, that answer is yes. So I'm here to represent a different side. I've been through a divorce. I'm coming at this from the viewpoint of a physical therapist and a fellow of pain science for almost 35 years. And I apply the same techniques with my pain clients that I do with my divorce clients, because honestly, there's a lot of crossover. And I know this firsthand because I went through a challenging, contentious divorce. And I like to make it a little bit fun. So we're going to talk about pain and divorce a little bit like a cookie in a very brief manner today. And again, most of us like cookies. Now, the cookie depends on our ingredients, right? There's not one ingredient that makes or breaks a cookie. The same is true with divorce. There are a lot of factors that led to the divorce and the pain that you're having from it. And often about now, people say, well, Jen, are you talking about physical or emotional pain? Well, the answer is simply yes, because they always go together. So when you are going through this divorce, please know there are lots of different things that have gotten you to this place, and some are in your control and many are not. The same is true with that cookie. What if we had butter that was old, or we had eggs that were rotten? That would impact our cookie. Now, the next quick reference to the cookie and divorce and pain is the processing. Well, what went on to get you to this decision? What are your beliefs about divorce? For me, it was very difficult because there are religious beliefs and standards that really made me hesitate before taking that leap. What are your experiences with your family, with your culture that may have influenced that decision either positively or negatively? And when it comes to pain, again, it's your beliefs about pain and your experiences that drive how you will go through that experience. And lastly, the most important part is the output. And with our cookie, we want that yummy, crunchy, gooey chocolate chip cookie. We don't want the burnt cookie, which is maybe divorce. We don't want that cookie that only had one chocolate chip in it because it was the last one in the batch, and maybe that's a painful experience. So the good news here is that you can choose to change your ingredients and look closely at your experiences and your beliefs, and all of these together can influence the outcome. You can choose a pain-less cookie for your life of more during and after divorce.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Lydia Desnoyers, CPA and fractional CFO. While I do tax preparation, I like to focus more on tax strategy and tax planning and advisory work. And when I think about tax planning and tax advisory, I think of the life changes that you may experience that impact your taxes. And one of those life changes can be divorce. And sometimes when you're going through a divorce, and whether it's through litigation or through mediation, and you're going through suffering all that pain and stuff, maybe taxes aren't the last thing on your mind. But it's so important that when you're working with your financial advisors or your CPAs or your attorneys, that you do have a conversation about the tax implications of your divorce. So I'm excited to share some things to keep in mind while you're going through this process. I know it's painful. It's probably not something you want to go through. And taxes, to add the tax element to it may be difficult as well. But some things when we think about divorce, I know when I think about divorce, I think of alimony, right? That's the first thing that people think about. Who's paying alimony, who's receiving alimony, and who's responsible for it. So understanding that whether it is tax deductible if you're the person paying, or whether or not it's tax deductible, or if you're the person receiving, whether or not it's taxable income. Now, if you're, we're in 2026 already, and so tax laws change in the end of 2018, whereby now the person paying alimony does no longer get to deduct the alimony. And, it's really important to know these things because it's not just about how much you're getting, but it's the long-term cash flow effect when it comes to the tax liability. And so keeping in mind that as a person receiving alimony, you wouldn't have to report that as income anymore. And the reason for that is because usually the person who's paying alimony is a higher income earner. And so the IRS wants a bigger chunk of that amount rather than the person receiving the alimony. Now keep in mind, if you had a divorce, let's say before the 2018, and you make any changes to that MSA, that marital separation agreement, then the new rules would apply unless you work with your attorney to make sure that you are protected. So this matters in terms of like negotiations and going through the divorce process because obviously the tax implication. The other thing to think about is when there are children involved, who is going to be claiming the kids, who's going to get the tax credits. And so understanding that it's not just a matter of who has custody of the child. Your MSA agreement may stipulate that you can alternate. So keeping in mind what those implications are, and having an agreement not only in your MSA but also knowing that there are additional forms that you would have to supply to the IRS if depending on which parent is going to claim that child. So something else to consider. And if there's any conflict between your MSA and IRS rules, just know that the IRS is going to prevail. So making sure that you understand those kind of things. Now, when we talk about alimony and things of that nature, it's sometimes, think about a tax strategy. It may be more beneficial for like lump sum settlement agreements, which leads me to the next talking point. One of the experiences that when I met Michelle and that kind of led to this webinar, me being part of this webinar, is a scenario where I was working as a forensic accountant on a divorce case. And I remember the spouse, the wife, soon to be ex-wife, was making some concessions with the understanding that she would be paid outside of the agreement by her ex-husband through his business. And I remember thinking to myself and having that conversation with her and saying, do we really want to take that approach? You want to, you have to understand that anything outside the MSA agreement may cause or trigger taxes, right? A taxable activity. And so, which brings me to the point that, when you're talking about settlements and property settlements and sharing of those settlements, it's so important. The timing and the language that's in your MSA can significantly help. So it's really important that you, when you're working with your attorney or your financial planner or tax advisor, that you understand that when we are thinking about property settlements, you want to make sure that it's included in your MSA, because it may provide you favorable terms in terms of limiting any taxable activity. And so it's just really, obviously I'm a numbers person, and I like to remain professional and objective, but I do understand it can be a very emotional experience, and I like to help my clients to navigate and find balance between the emotions and the objectivity, financial objectivity of the divorce process.
So we all spoke about divorce and the impact it can have on you, whether it's physically, emotionally, tax-wise, financially. And then Leslie spoke about the different types of divorce. So obviously, being a financial, I'm going to start off with a financial question. And Leslie, this one's for you. So if we talk about the different types of divorce, and if let's say we just say mediation, collaborative divorce, litigation, if we talk about those three main types of divorce, how much would you say that there's a difference in terms of the cost to divorcing people?
That's a really good question, Michelle, because the cost is going to be an issue when you're looking at these three different kinds. The most cost-efficient way, of course, in that between those three would be mediation. And that is because the mediation process, again, is voluntary. And it's usually for couples that are a little bit more amicable, and they've already decided that we're putting the fight to the side, and we agree on what we want to. We agree that we need a divorce, and we're going to try to reasonably walk through this process together and come to a settlement that they can live with. And a mediation, you can, if the couple really already has in their mind what they want to settle upon, they can wrap their divorce process up between $5,000 and $10,000 with that process. Now, litigation is where the couple doesn't agree, or they just don't know about divorce, and so they're both just like, let's get an attorney, and they decide to go file for divorce in court. One files, one serves the other person. With litigation, it really again depends on how high the conflict is and how high the stakes are, and if someone is where they are. Is somebody really ready for the divorce and the other one isn't? Does somebody not want a divorce and wants to just make it difficult? Those kind of things will figure into a litigation. That process lasts on average about 2 years, and the cost for a litigated divorce is going to be around $30,000 for the couple. Collaborative divorce typically will fall in the middle of that, and that is because for a collaborative divorce to work and be successful and cost efficient, it really depends on the team. The team is working together to get this couple to a settlement. The couple doesn't have to be amicable. The couple doesn't necessarily have to agree, but they understand that they want to do it outside of court and get a settlement. Maybe they want to keep their divorce proceedings private, whatever the case may be. So that collaborative team can get them to a decision, and it's usually a little bit quicker than litigation. So it'll be, under a 2-year process, maybe a year and a half. Again, it really ultimately depends on the clients, but there is in collaborative a little nudge to get everybody over the edge, because that process really lends itself towards the team working for a settlement. Because if they don't reach a settlement, everyone that's participated in the collaborative process, the attorneys, the financial neutral, the communications coach, they are all conflicted out of the process. So there's a really, really great incentive in collaborative divorce to go ahead and reach that settlement. And again, it usually will fall in between the price of litigation and mediation. But sometimes collaborative can be even higher because you do have a full team. But I feel like the decisions that a couple will reach in collaborative are a little bit more durable because they both have had their say-so. They've had all of their concerns in the divorce listened to, and they've talked it through. And the settlements are just a little bit more durable than just your litigated divorce where the judge says, this is your day in court. We got an hour and a half. This is the decision, and this is what everybody has to go home and live with. So that's really where the price differences can lie. The collaborative could cost more, but it's typically going to fall in between the price of a mediated divorce and a litigated divorce.
Absolutely. And I would say that I haven't seen a situation yet where the collaborative was more than the litigation, just because, litigation, they're paying those attorneys, and it can lend itself to just like a spiraling effect. The other thing I will mention is that there's cost and then there's value. So I'm not promoting collaborative per se, but I am promoting the team effort. And the members of a collaborative team, you can have those members of a team with mediation. You could also have them in litigation. But I would say that the cost associated with the various members of the team, like the mental health professionals or divorce coach, your like the therapist and so on, to help you manage the mental health aspects of it, manage how are you going to co-parent if there are kids involved? How are you going to move forward? That's worth its weight in gold, I would say, because there are the numbers, which I love, but there's also that other cost, the cost, to your physical, mental, emotional health and to your family, and the ability to move forwards. Whatever type of divorce you have, it is important to consider having a team. And yeah, that might increase the cost, but it might really not when you look at cost and value. So as we talk about that type of cost, physical, kind of encroaching on mental health and so on, Jen, my question for you is really just about, I guess you shared a little bit about your story, and I'd ask for just you to go a little bit more and give an example of when you went to the settlement table or, to the mediation, and tell that story. I know the story, so it's a big spoiler alert and such, but I think that that's really helpful because it was a lot about mindset, in terms of getting to that resolution.
Sure. Well, we had 2 miserably failed mediations. And as Leslie mentioned, it's 2 people who say they want to come to the table. And in my case, we were not able to make any agreements. And I had previous experience with pain myself, and I had used what I learned with pain science and physical therapy to help navigate that. And then during the very contentious divorce, we decided to try retired judge mediation. And I realized we'd had 2 failures already. It is getting more expensive, and I have to do something different. So at some point, it just dawned on me. Everything I do with my physical therapy clients and my pain clients, which is physical work, body work, it is mental fitness, it is all of it, decided to just turn that inward. And that's how I prepared for the 3rd mediation. The first 2 mediations, I woke up absolutely panicked and overwhelmed. This 3rd mediation, I woke up oddly excited and grounded, and it was a really weird experience. And I had also the night before got this really weird light bulb moment, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And so with the retired judge mediation, for us, we were all together, and then we were about to go into separate rooms, and the judge says, is there anything else? And I stand up and I just reach my hand out across the table, lock eyes with my kid's dad, and I say, we can do this. It was very odd because I actually felt confident and grounded when I said that. So the day's going on, it's not going all that great. And I get this ridiculous offer late afternoon. And my lawyer's like, Jen, we are not going to make it to the end. And I was like, okay. However, I had prepared for this metaphorical bomb. I intentionally thought about what is the worst case scenario, and more importantly, what would I do? So my prep work of mapping out that law office, taking photos, knowing where the exits were, knowing where the bathrooms were, my regular physical preparation of sleep and eating and activity, the mental fitness preparation, and I even created an album on my phone called Compassion and Power. And what it was pictures of my kid's dad so that I could practice looking at him without feeling fear. So when that moment came, I was pretty grounded, and I was able to just say to my lawyer and to the judge, if this is the hill he wants to die on, okay, I know where the exit is and I can just walk out. Spoiler alert, I had a signed agreement by 5:30.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know that it's not a joyful experience to relive that, but I really thank you for sharing because I think it can help so many people. I mean, mindset does play a role. It
absolutely
really does.
And
yeah.
So many people in my journey said the healing begins after divorce. And I 100% reject that. Because when you are using a full body, full nervous system approach, you are healing all along the way.
Wow. I feel like mic drop, so I guess I'll just leave that at that. All right, excellent. So another major part of divorce, or it can be a major part of divorce, are tax implications. And I loved what you said, Lydia, about making sure that making sure that your marital separation agreement is really solid. It's interesting because I've had situations where I have said to folks, do need to meet with your tax advisor, meet with a tax advisor to talk about this, because while I can suggest, hey, this is a situation, I'll frame out an example. You have a couple and one of them is going to stay in the marital home and the other one is not going to stay in the marital home, but is a joint owner. And they've agreed that, this is going to be like a 10-year process or a 5-year process for whatever reason. Well, it is a possibility that if you put it in the marital separation agreement and you make sure that it's framed in the right terminology, which you need your attorney to help with that, but also it's wise to consult your tax advisor, that you would not have to lose that capital gains exclusion, $250,000 due to that person, as long as it was framed out properly, which is very much in line with what you said, Lydia, about, the IRS rules.
Yeah.
Right. So make sure your MSA is really tight. And I think that that's magnified even more for business owners. So can you speak to that? Like, someone owns a business or businesses and they're looking at, oh my gosh, how can I do this? And how can I do this and not have like some kind of tax bump?
Yeah. It is a great question, and especially you find a lot of couples who have businesses together. And so what happens in a divorce, excuse me. So, we treat business as any other asset, right? And so when you frame it that way, and to your point about, having everything, the timing and everything properly stipulated in your MSA agreement, you have to be careful of what can trigger a taxable event. Not just a taxable event, but then if it is a taxable event, what capital gains are we looking at? If we're using a rollover cost basis, if we're using fair market value, all these things are variables that need to be considered and weighed to determine, okay, do you want to separate this and just take a lump sum, or who's going to retain ownership of the business? Are you guys going to maintain the business relationship even through the divorce? Or so all that, they have different financial and tax implications that need to be understood, weighed, and decided on. And so it's very important to understand those, the tax implications, especially with the businesses and other assets, your home. Right. I had a scenario where, years ago, someone came to do their taxes and we're selling our marital house, but we've been divorced for so many years and it wasn't in our MSA. So you're losing, you lose the capital gains, what's your cost basis in it. And so it's very interesting that person just completely did not know that this is something that they had to think about during that divorce, and to have it in the marital separation agreement. Some of it is ignorance, right? And I mean that in a respectful way, just, a lack of knowledge, lack of resources and the right professionals in our corner. And some of it is the, possible emotional guilt that one spouse is placing on the other. Promises, hey, I'll give you a sweeter deal if we do this later, or if we don't include it in the separation agreement. Many years ago, I kind of alluded to it in my introduction, of this couple getting divorced, and a husband has a medical clinic, and said, instead of alimony, I will just pay you a salary later on, from my business, because he wants to get the write-off for his business and whatnot. But he didn't want it to be in the MSA agreement. And I kind of just took a step back and said, listen, it sounds great now, right? But this is also the guy who promised to be with you until death do you part, and he's leaving. So obviously he can go back on his word. And what happens when he remarries, or whatever the case may be, and now his new spouse says, hey, look, I don't want your business paying your ex-wife anymore. What happens? You have no recourse. And so it's about objective and not, because there is the part of, hey, you want to be collaborative and all that. And then there's that point where you're just so exhausted. Jen, I thought your story was going to go a different direction, where you're going to say, it was a low offer, but I just took it because it's over. And I was like, no. But there is that scenario as well, right? Where people are just like, I'm just so over this, I don't want to deal with it anymore. And then I'm just going to sign all my rights and things away. So making sure that you understand those things and just looking at the numbers, right? And being able to kind of step out of the emotions and just look at the numbers and see what makes sense for you. And yeah, so it is something to really consider and weigh. Great question.
I'm going to pick up on a couple of gems that you threw down there. The first thing is when you said the right professionals, and it goes back to overlaps with what Leslie was saying in terms of cost, because I can think of a case where that exclusion would not have been included if I had not advised. The $250,000 capital gain exclusion would not have been preserved if I had not advised the couple of that. And there was a team in place. Unfortunately, they wanted to kind of do it themselves as far as the legal stuff, which I wouldn't advise. And they did not want to. I advised them to get a CPA to make sure that everything was done properly in terms of the tax side of things. I don't know if they did or not. But what I will tell you is that they did have a financial planner and they had me. And the financial planner, great financial planner, certified financial planner professional, just like I'm a certified financial planner professional, but had not been trained on the finances of divorce. And that's where certified divorce financial analysts come into play. And so the financial planner did not know about that special exclusion or preservation of the capital gains exclusion for the marital home in the event of a divorce and so on. So when we go back to cost, yeah, it might have cost, something to hire another professional, but there was value there. Definitely. And so that right team includes making sure that the team has the specialized knowledge of divorce and what that means. When you spoke about that example with in this case, it was a husband having the medical clinic and, I will pay you a salary in lieu of alimony. You were spot on about quite a few things, because if you think about it, when another person gets involved, if they're not already involved, because unfortunately sometimes that happens.
That's a divorce, yeah.
Right? When another person gets involved, they're not necessarily going to be as comfortable with you paying your former spouse. They're not going to be necessarily as comfortable with some of the things that you all had agreed to. And we all want to please our mate, our partner, our new partner in life. And understandably, that can mean changing things up. So it is very, very important to have the documentation, to have, your attorneys really make sure, or if there are no attorneys involved, the mediators and so on, make sure that the language is crafted in such a way that you have, a leg to stand on, and it's somewhat enforceable. It's where you are today is not where you will be, and that's the same thing for the other person. And just assuming the better nature, I've seen people change. Let's say they go through an incapacitation where they're not mentally or cognitively the same as they were. And now who's making decisions? It's someone else. And if there's nothing legally enforceable, then that just is what it is. In addition to which, I'm sure that there are tax implications to one way of handling it versus another as far as income goes and so on. So that was really, really great. Leslie and Jen, what are your thoughts? Because I've been monopolizing the conversation.
I would like to comment on something Lydia said. Clearly, we've had the same experience that most people are so exhausted and overwhelmed by all of it that they take a lowball offer just to get out. And that is why preparation beyond your finances and your documents is so critically important to not only preserve your energy, because chances are your energy is pretty low going into the divorce, but what are the strategies available to you to actually enhance that, to be mentally and physically grounded and ready to actually advocate for yourself. So I'm glad that I threw a loop at you, and I'm sad that we both had that experience that so many people end up there because of the exhaustion.
Yeah, and the key thing that you said, because I didn't even realize that that's the kind of the role I was playing for that spouse. When you say staying grounded, I wouldn't have known that term years ago, but that's what I did. She was thinking emotionally, and I grounded her And the reason I keep coming back to her, because I remember after the experience, many years later, she found me on Facebook and was like, Lydia, I still think about you to this day. You know, you got me through this really, really, you helped me be objective in this very emotional period in my life. So I always go back to that story and scenario when I played as her forensic accountant, is the grounding. You know, you said like being mentally prepared and grounded so that when you do get these curveballs, you can say, hey, let me just, I can handle it. like you said, you could put your hand out, look them in the eye and say, we can do this, you know? And so I love that terminology of being grounded in such a tumultuous.
You're reminding me, because a lot of people advise women in particular not to be emotional, especially if they're in litigation. And so I was really lucky because I created an online program and the retired judge agreed to let me interview him. So he is actually part of the program. And that's one of the questions I asked him. I'm like, hey, you know, what's the deal? We're told not to be emotional. And I loved his answer. His answer was, be emotional. All right, I'm, surmising it now. Be emotional and be present. Yeah. If we are emotional to the point where we cannot function, I've been there, that is not helpful to anyone. If we are authentic and showing up with our emotions, yet we are still in the place in our bodies and our minds where we can function, that's where everything's going to go much more smoothly.
That sounds super healthy. And I feel like that can be applied in so many areas of our life.
Absolutely.
I'll chime in on this as well, because I think you guys are making such good points. And Lydia, the thing that I really liked about what you were just saying is the right team. And I think, Michelle, you were mentioning this too. Because when people find out that they need to have a divorce or their spouse wants a divorce, it's immediate panic. It's, I need to get a lawyer. And yes, go consult with an attorney about what steps you're going to take next. But realize that you are a whole person and this is a whole process. Divorce is akin to the death of a spouse. It is a very traumatic event. And there are, you don't want to spend a bunch of money and you're thinking about this whole team. I just need an attorney. But the divorce coach will help you be present and understand the feelings that you feel when you hear a settlement that's ridiculous and realize that's just panic and I don't have to accept that. And let's pull that down. Like, the right divorce coach will help you through that. The right therapist will help you stay focused on this and not be thinking about something from the past. The right financial professional will help you say, hey, if you guys both remain on the title, you can both take that capital gains deduction when you get ready to sell the house rather than if you retitle it right now. And if you have the right attorney, they'll help you make sure that the divorce decree is durable and that you can uphold it in court if something falls through, right? So the right team can, in the long run, ultimately save you lots of money. Having the right people in place to really help you get to a decision that is sound. In the divorce process, people don't want to make decisions because they're afraid. Well, I don't know what'll happen if this is, and I don't know if I can accept this offer. But the right people in place will help you know, if you take this offer, this is what it'll look like in the, as time goes on financially, you can accept this and you will be fine. And putting the right people in place to help you with that helps make that divorce process not be so scary and gives you that peace of mind for that divorce decree to be sound as time goes on.
Leslie, in the pain world, we have this phrase, the fear of pain is often worse than the pain itself. The fear of finances after divorce is often worse. So we can fill that in with fear of a first date, fear of trying liver, whatever it is. But it's true because there's so many tools available that we can quiet and sometimes eliminate that fear.
Absolutely. And then going back to what you were saying about the right team, you and Lydia were saying about the right team, I would say that not all attorneys are the same. And I had a conversation with a gentleman who was interviewing me. He and his spouse were interviewing me, and they decided to move forward. And one of the funny things that he said was when he had met with certain attorneys, one of the attorneys was like, "Oh, you can't take that from her. She's emasculating you, da 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 da," like just in the initial discovery. And he said, like, I could tell that was his stance, and essentially I would end up spending a lot of money to take what is, a difficult but amicable process for this particular couple into a whole different direction that would then have meant that, there was no way they would be in the same room together and all this kind of stuff. Whereas they decided for a process that would while they're not skipping through fields together saying woohoo,
Yeah.
there have been issues, which is why they're getting divorced. At the same time, they can be civil, they can be at family functions together, and they can, to some extent, continue to support each other. Not in the same way, but, hey, you need a dog sitter? I can do that, that type of thing. You don't get that way if you are going at it tooth and nail.
Right.
The repercussions, physical and mental, emotional, financial, are much greater if you do that. So it does matter. Look into whether it's the lawyer who's just looking over the memorandum of understanding from a mediation, or you just want, to have someone to give you the different options or look at legality of different provisions. Look into them first, because if they're not resolution focused, then that tells you a lot about the trajectory of the process. You can't control what your spouse does and who your spouse chooses, but you can control your actions and who you choose to have on your team and how they approach things. And ultimately, I think the costs in every way are lower when you look at a resolution focused divorce as opposed to a hostile, bring them to their knees type of situation. You pay for that monetarily and even in your body. It's not good for you. Okay. All right. So one question is really and truly, what does the divorce coach do again?
I guess that's me. Well, it's important to recognize that a divorce coach is not a counselor. We have very different roles. And I am coming at it differently than most divorce coaches. My job is to help you see where you are right now and where it is that you want to be, whether that is in the physical experience or is it your sleep or your nutrition. And we're going to be really targeting this towards your divorce and what your ultimate goals are there. And there's so much prep work that we can do to help you. Is it for mediation? Is it for going to court? I had one woman once, and we just spent 10 minutes doing simple imagery work because she was absolutely terrified at having to see him in court for some appearance. And she hadn't seen him in a year or two. And in the beginning of this 10 minutes, she's like, my heart is racing, I'm sweaty, I can't do this. And she just was trying to look at him with her eyes closed in the safety of her space. And then within the 10 minutes, suddenly she could see herself in the courtroom, looking at him, being present, and able to function just because of that little bit of brain rewiring that we did. And so from my perspective, I'm using all of the tools of pain science and lifestyle medicine to help you show up for your divorce in the way that you want to get through to your next chapter.
And be unshakable.
Thank you. And then this next question, I guess, is for you, Lydia. So I do my own taxes. Why on earth would I need to consult a CPA? My business is pretty simple and sole proprietorship. Like, why on earth do I need to consult a CPA while I'm going through this divorce?
You don't know what you don't know. That's the simplest thing I can say. I've had clients who come to me just as new clients to do tax preparation after divorce. Maybe it's the first tax season after the divorce, and so they're used to doing taxes with their ex-spouse. Now they're trying to do taxes on their own. And you just kind of find things that they missed that could have done differently that, again, they didn't know at that time. And so it's really important, back to the conversations that we had about having the right professionals, right, to guide you through certain things, to help you think about different strategies. It definitely, the value that you would get would outweigh the cost, as it should be with any professional, any investment that you make, right? You want to get value out of it. And so you want to make sure that, one, you're compliant with the IRS. I mean, nobody wants, after a divorce, the last thing you want is to have to deal with Uncle Sam. But then, it's not just staying compliant, but it's also making sure after divorce, where, coming from possibly two-income home to now you're the sole breadwinner, you want to hold on to as much of your coins as you can. And so, making sure that you are taking advantage of all deductions, credits, filing status, even that sometimes. I've had people who come to me and look at the previous tax return and they've been filing as single, and it's like, you have a child. You should be head of household, and that alone can help them. In terms of, and I think a lot of times we think about divorce and it's the husband who's paying alimony or whatever, but I've had scenarios where it's the woman who was the breadwinner and is the one that had to pay alimony and take funds from, stock options that she had from her employer, or, taking out her retirement and stuff. So making sure that she understood how to do things in a way that wouldn't trigger a tax liability for her. Then also, doing calculations. I remember post MSA, there was a little bit of ambiguity in how something was worded. And when we worked together, I remember her saying, "Look, you just saved me like thousands of dollars, having to pay her ex-husband because of my interpretation of that thing." He obviously pushed back, and we went back, and they met each other somewhere in the middle. But without that conversation, without me actually reading her MSA, most CPAs don't do that. Talk about the right CPA, right? Most CPAs wouldn't do that. But I had her send me the agreement. I read it, made sure I understood what it said. And I was like, hey, there's a little bit of room here, to make this work in your favor. And it did. And it saved her thousands of dollars. So on her taxes and what she had to pay to her ex-spouse. So it's definitely important to have a CPA to make sure you understand the tax law, especially they're changing so much, in the recent years. I mean, we went from, I mentioned it earlier on, where before it used to be the person who's paying alimony gets to take the deduction and the person receiving alimony would report it as income. Well, that changed drastically, and that changed a lot of the way in which people negotiate their alimony now, right? Because if now, as a person paying, now I'm still responsible for taxes, I may want to pay my ex-spouse less, right? Because I want to cover the tax liability that I'm still responsible for. And so understanding that and understanding what that means to you and how that translates to your tax return and things like that. So, finding that right balance of like, well, how much of alimony are you willing to give up because now you're not paying taxes, but understanding that code change and knowing that if you change your MSA agreement, even after these changes, that even if the divorce happened before these changes, how it could, there could be an implication there. So definitely important to work with a professional as a CPA and doing tax strategy and tax planning, do more future focus work.
Thank you. That's great. So the next question is, it seems like it's your question, Leslie, made for you. So this person is asking, I would like to do mediation because it's less costly, but my spouse is not at all, I can't imagine that he would agree to it. We're not amicable. So is that even possible? Have you worked with situations, Leslie, where it's not been them really getting along, but the mediation has still been successful? Can you speak to that, please?
So, excuse me, in that case, one of the things that I would recommend is that the person who is trying to hire you as a mediator, share the mediator's information with your husband and ask your husband to call and set up a consultation as well. Let the mediator talk with your husband about the possibility of you guys really participating in the process. Like, I don't have the other spouse try to convince their spouse to come. I say, share my information with your spouse, and I'll have a meeting with them as well to make sure that they understand the process and understand the neutrality of the mediator and how it is voluntary and they both have to agree to participate. And so if you run into a position where the spouse won't even entertain calling a mediator or anything to that nature, then I would talk to that person about some of the attorneys that I work with that are more settlement oriented. And I would say, okay, here's a couple of attorneys for you both to consult with, but both of these attorneys are settlement oriented. And even though your spouse is saying, I don't want to mediate, you can give them this list of attorneys to talk to who won't be the kind of attorneys that will escalate a fight or that are mindful that, legal language sometimes feels attacking. It can make a person feel like they're being attacked, just being part of the process, and it might not be the intent. So when you have attorneys that are mindful of that, it can still make your process go a little better. And this is also a person that I would talk to about collaborative. So again, I would talk to them about the wealth of options for approaches to divorce and have them share all of those with their spouse. Here's a couple of attorneys to consult, and here's a mediator if you want to speak to them too. I know we aren't feeling that amicable, but we don't have to be amicable to go through divorce and still not spend all of our money. That's the conversation that I would have with her and tell her that I could have with her spouse as well.
Okay, and then another question is, I'm in California, I'm not in Arizona, so can I work with a mediator who's in Arizona? And I actually think this is a question that's relevant for all of us because, I find that people don't realize that they don't have to work with someone in their state other than the attorneys. Go ahead,
Right.
Leslie.
So that's a really great question because a mediator can work with people from different states. The important thing is I would work with a mediator that had worked with a couple in my state before, a mediator that is familiar with your divorce laws. But really, the mediation is the process between the two people divorcing. And you don't have to follow divorce laws. That couple can come up with what they feel is best for them and agree to that settlement. The mediator should then suggest that you both go talk to a consulting attorney in your area. Talk about what you all have agreed upon before you finalize the decree and make sure that what you all have agreed upon is durable. Make sure that if this fell through, you could go to court and have it upheld. Have an attorney from where you are, just make sure that you've agreed to durable things. Not have them look at it and say, oh, you can get more than that, or you could do this, or why did you do that? Like, keep in mind why you two in the couple came up with what you've decided upon, why you felt that's best for your family, but just have an attorney where you are, consult over it. Not retain, just consult so that they can say, yeah, this is durable. Yes, you could take that into court and litigate that if the person later on says they don't want to do it. So that's the approach I would take with that too. As a mediator and as a certified divorce financial analyst, a CDFA, you can work with clients from all over.
And then the same for divorce coaches and CPAs. This is a common one, Lydia, as well. Can you speak to, which states you can, state residents you can work with?
I am licensed in the state of Florida, and as long as I'm domiciled there, I work with clients all over the country. That said, I personally prefer to work with clients who are in states that don't have state income tax implications. I could work with them, it's just my preference, because I just think, to be prudent, you may want to work with somebody who's familiar with the legal aspects of the state that you live in. That said, I have clients all over. I have in Virginia, New York, California. I don't think I have anyone in Arizona, Leslie, so maybe it could be deferred. Okay. But yeah, no, all over, we're remote.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. I didn't know if there was anything else that you all wanted to add before we close out.
I think we covered everything.
All right, excellent. Okay.
One thing to say.
Sure.
Divorce is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your next story.
That's a great way to end. Thank you for this great conversation. And I think this is an embodiment of why a team is helpful, because we come at it from different life experiences and professional experiences, but also we come at it from having that experience of supporting folks through divorce to help them start that next chapter on a more positive note. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, everybody.